Welcome back to Obsolete Automotive. I'm Austin, and today's video is how to fix the radiator on your 66 Chrysler. So back in July, after having driven this car all the way from California to North Carolina, took a road trip from here up to Maine and back. I will post links to those different trips on this description of this video. If you watch the New England trip, you will know that in Intervale, New Hampshire, after having climbed Mount Washington, you can see the bumper sticker right there. My radiator blew up. I was kind of up the creek without a paddle, really. There's no way to get a radiator for one of these cars easily or quickly, I should say. If you watch the video, you'll see how I solved that problem and was able to make the 1,000 miles back home. Yes, so by the time I got home, I was like, I need to fix this radiator because it was a temporary repair, but it just kept forming more leaks. So it was not even an original radiator. It was an aftermarket replacement radiator that I don't even think was that old. Basically, all the seams just started leaking in places. So the top tank blew apart in New Hampshire, and the more I drove it, the more things started coming apart. The straps that hold the tank on came apart. And I just kept having to solder the radiator. So I went to try to get a new radiator or a replacement, and you just couldn't. So on these cars, with the 440, with the AC and everything, it actually has a different core support. So it takes a different radiator than the standard cars did. So it has its own size radiator. It was a 26-inch radiator. So not necessarily easy to find. I didn't have the original radiator for this car. I wasn't going to have the replacement brass radiator that came with the car. I wasn't going to have that one record or anything. It just wasn't worth it. I looked at seeing getting a new one of those, and they were like between $500 to $800. So then I started looking at other options. I found places that could make exact copies, apparently, but from what I figured out, these exact replacements aren't exactly exact replacements. I would get measurements and they were wrong. So they weren't going to fit this car. So I ended up looking for an aluminum radiator. So then there was all these companies that claimed they could make an exact drop-in radiator for this car. I'd ask, and they'd finally send me measurements, and guess what? They wouldn't work because they were totally wrong, and then they wouldn't make different brackets to work in my application. They don't do that, apparently. So much for all these specialty companies. What actually ended up working was the cheapest option. So on eBay, there's literally like a $130 aluminum radiator. So I bought it. Yeah, it came from China, I'm sure, but measurements spot on. The radiator shroud, the fan shroud, perfect fit. The radiator bolted up just fine. The inlet and outlet for the hoses were fine. And for all intents and purposes, it was pretty much a direct bolt in. So I went with that. The cheapest option. I've had it in the car since, I don't know, I guess maybe September or so. And I've been driving this car a lot, taking it on trips and everything. And the radiator performs perfect. No problems. So this is a video just kind of showing what I did, the radiator, how it fit and everything. So follow along. So basically, after looking and researching and all that is involved with that, the only options for a radiator that will bolt right up to this 66 Chrysler with the 440 and AC, which is a 26-inch radiator, is literally the cheapest radiator that you can get. The measurements and everything are exact. It is an aluminum radiator. The only other option is what's already in the car. So the other option, not so good, because as you can tell, it wasn't that old and it failed very badly. So I got a aluminum radiator, and I know a few people that have used, actually I think this exact same radiator in their cars for years without any problem. So I got one for myself, and is it going to look 100% correct? No. But I drive my cars. I don't just like take them to shows. I don't really care. I'm not going to get judged for points or anything. It is welded all the way around. The tank is sort of in a shape of the original one. Like I said, it does have the brackets for the shroud, which is exactly the same. So all the measurements are correct. This one should bolt right up. Drain cock there, got the lines for the transmission cooler. This one's for a big block. And like I said, the only one that's actually going to work, because all the name brand or high quality, whatever you want to say, radiators are not correct, even though they say they are. So what I'm going to do is paint this thing black so it doesn't look as obnoxiously like an aluminum radiator. But I don't really open the hoods of my cars anyway, so again, not too concerned. All right, scuffed this radiator down, primed it, painted it. So now it's pretty much ready to go in the car. So let's get to it. With this brass radiator that I think probably came from like AutoZone or something, I wasn't really impressed with how thin the tanks are, and the fact that the joint just blew out and didn't even look like it really had much for solder or anything on there. So yes, just given the fact that this radiator, buying one of these from like a parts house, if you can actually get it, is like $800. I don't have the original radiator for this car, and even if I did, that would still probably cost me like $800 to have it record. This is a 3-row radiator. Fan shroud off. radiator, it comes with 2 fittings to go on if you're just using straight hoses. This car has 1 hose and 1 original hardline, so I'm gonna put it back in the way the other radiator was, so should be good to go. Radiator support bolts or holes line up perfectly. And let's see how the shroud goes. And the shroud lines up perfect. None of the specialty radiator companies that supposedly made exact fit radiators for this car, none of them worked. They all had the wrong measurements. I don't know why they all have the wrong measurements, but this $140 eBay, most likely made in China radiator bolts right up perfectly. So why American companies can't get it right, I don't know. This was basically my only option. So that's what's going in the car, because been spending way too much time trying to figure out what would go in this car, and I wasn't about to spend $2,000 and or whatever the heck else companies were wanting. It was kind of insane. So if you got a 66 Chrysler with the heavy duty radiator, the 26-inch radiator with a fan shroud, if you have air conditioning, this radiator bolts right in. Now we'll go hook up the rest of this stuff, the transmission cooler lines, tighten up all the bolts, fan shroud nuts, and we're pretty much done. Got to fill it up and I think we'll be good to go. Got the radiator all bolted up, fan shroud bolted up, transmission cooler lines hooked up. I will say that the factory metal lines did not want to thread onto this radiator's threads. It's like the threads aren't, I guess they're maybe not the right size. You know, maybe it's a difference in metric or standard. I didn't really check. I just ended up using another piece of hose because the one side had already been replaced with a piece of hose, so I just went ahead and made the driver's side one a piece of hose as well. So not that big a deal for me at least, but keep that in mind. One other thing to check is the drain cock there is dripping antifreeze, so this needs to be tightened up. There we go. I think somebody forgot to do that at the factory. Still full of coolant, hasn't leaked any, the car doesn't overheat. This has been in here since September, still totally fine, no problems. I did paint it black, as you can see, just to kind of hide it some. But really, I don't open the hoods of my cars at car shows or anything like that unless somebody wants to see in. So I don't really care. And I wasn't about to spend, you know, 800 to some radiators were $2,000. It just wasn't worth it to me. My cars are drivers, and I just drive them. I don't care about show quality, exact parts, things like that. I just want the car to be reliable and drive. Now, if you're hauling your car around on a trailer and you got to have the exact radiator and all that crap, then sure, you can go for that. But I want something that's easy to fix, easy and reliable. So yes, I have the cheapest option. If I need another one of these radiators, I can have it in a few days actually, and I know that it'll bolt in. And it really doesn't look too out of place if you don't look too close. I tried other options, aluminum radiators that had stamped tanks and everything, but all those companies, like I said, they just wouldn't offer the correct brackets. I even asked, can you just, weld the brackets on? Don't cut them, don't drill them. Nope, they don't do that. I guess all their stuff's pre-made. I don't know. Like, I don't even know if all those companies are even made in USA anyway. You wouldn't think it'd be that hard to just get the correct brackets for different applications. You'd think they would want to, but I guess maybe there's so few cars that I'm not sure when uh, these cars had this specific radiator. I know I guess at least 65 and 66 had the different core support. It has you can't see it, of course, because of the air conditioning stuff, but it has a wider opening because this has a 26-inch radiator. And the cars that didn't have air conditioning or not high performance, they actually had a smaller radiator. They had a smaller opening. So I've learned the core supports are apparently different between these cars. So you can't just like put whatever in. Anyways, I looked at every option. I contacted, I don't know how many aluminum radiator companies and other brass radiator companies, and basically I couldn't get anything that would actually bolt up to this car correctly. They had all these different options, different cars. There's stuff they claimed would work. I actually had bought an aluminum radiator that had the stamped tank and everything because they told me it would fit this car, and it didn't. So, and of course I couldn't return it and whatever. So that's why I actually got measurements for this radiator. One of my friends had one of these in his car that he made work for his car because it's a little bit different application. But he gave me the measurements, and I was like, wow, this is spot on. And it was like exactly spot on. So really, the only issue that I ran into was the transmission cooler lines down there. I think they had like a different thread, but it did come with fittings to put hoses on. So one of mine already had a hose, so I just went ahead and made the other one a hose as well. I don't really care that it's not exact because it still works. This car has a trans cooler anyway, so it's not like a big deal. Like I said, the fan shroud bolted on, perfect, exactly the right size and everything. And that was another issue. Pretty much all the radiator companies didn't have a radiator that had the brackets for the shroud that would work with this shroud. Like I said, this might be like a couple year shroud they only used for a few years, but nobody had an option for me. I said this cheap $130 eBay radiator did the trick, and it works great. No problems, doesn't leak, keeps the car cool. It doesn't look too bad. I mean, it could be worse, I guess, but at least it's kind of in the same shape and everything. And once you paint it black, you really don't notice. And like I said, I don't open the hood anyway. The main thing, it was cheap, super cheap, 130 bucks. Boom, there it is. So got it fixed. The car is driving. It doesn't overheat, which is all that matters. So if you need a radiator for your 66 Chrysler with a big block and air conditioning, cheap eBay radiator. That's the ticket. And you can make it work for other cars because it's got pretty wide brackets, so you can drill to make it fit other vehicles as well. You could put this radiator in all kinds of different cars. And I will include a diagram of the measurements of this radiator so you can see if it could work for one of your applications. So keep that in mind. If you need a radiator, I know it's getting hard to find radiators uh, for these cars because nobody really makes them. And then it's also hard to even find a radiator shop. All the ones around me have closed. The closest one's like 45 minutes away, and I've had some issues with them, so I'm not using them. It's not worth it. A $500 core, which doesn't include putting it in. I mean, we're talking like 800 bucks to get a radiator record. I don't really care about part numbers that much. And for all the people that are going to comment, oh, aluminum radiators are bad, they're going to damage your cooling system, they're going to degrade, it's going to be a disaster. I've had cars that have aluminum radiators in them for a decade and there's no problems. So that's a myth. I got real world use. This car is totally fine. I have had cars that had aluminum radiators and they were totally fine. I don't know. I don't know where that all came from, but I had people when I was trying to find a radiator for this car. I posted on forums. People were like, "Oh no, don't use an aluminum radiator. You got to have the brass one. If you use the aluminum radiator, it's going to degrade. It's going to fail. Your car is going to overheat. Your motor's going to blow up. You just all these different stories and all these different supposed scientific reasons. There may be some science backing it. I don't know, but it works. And I've, like I said, had cars that had aluminum radiators in them for a decade. They still work. So I don't believe it. I got the real world experience. The aluminum radiators work just fine. Um, so take it as you will. If you don't want to use an aluminum radiator, you don't have to. But to me, I just don't want to spend $1,000+ on a radiator. So I went with this one. So you can too if you need a cheap radiator that works and will actually bolt up to this particular car and maybe some others as well. So anyways, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. And if you haven't, be sure to like and subscribe. There's always more content coming. And I guess we'll catch you on the next one.